Okay, should we begin? Is my mic on? Okay. Is there enough light coming? Are people happy with the light? Okay, can you hear me at the back? Multiple times? So I keep talking. Have we cleared up can we clear up the audio? Okay. Hello and welcome. Oh. So I'm wary now of speaking in case I deafen you all. Okay. Hello and welcome to the From Governance to Cooperation Decoding the Puzzle session. Why decoding the puzzle? Very simply, there is an enormous amount of discussions around internet governance going on this year by many different groups with many different perspectives, many different acronyms, of course, this being the internet world. And the idea of this session is to try and make sense of that. And how we're going to do that is by grasping three main issues, three themes in the internet governance world and digging into them. As you can see, we have quite a lot of panelists. We're going to be splitting them up roughly between these three different issues, although the others are, of course, welcome to jump in if they have a point that they wish to make. And so, without further ado, I should mention that the panelists cover just about every aspect. We have a government representative, we have obviously the technical community, we have civil society reps, we have academia represented, so this is a pretty multi-stakeholder panel that you're looking at up here. So without further ado, let's get on to the first issue. And if you could bring up the first slide, issue 1. Internet cooperation and development. Now, what we did in order to jump straight into the issues, because we have limited time, is we came up with a discussion starter statement. It's not a statement of fact by any individual organization. It's simply a way to get into the conversation quickly. And we came with a discussion starter. The main goal of internet governance is to provide answers to concerns raised by governments. So with that, I'd like to go to you, Yu Chang from ICANN. With that question, the question is, you're responsible for stakeholder engagement for ICANN in Asia Pacific. Would you say that a key goal of that engagement is to address government concerns?
Well, thank you for that. So from an ICANN perspective, when we talk about internet cooperation and whether the goal of that is meant to meet the concerns raised by governments, the answer is a big absolute yes. But is it just about governments? The discussion really has to be widened beyond that. I mean, we're here gathered for the APRICOT meetings. The discussions that we're having and the work that we're doing are only validated if the end users out there get the services they need, the small and medium businesses out there gets an internet that works, so that you're able to run commerce on the internet. These are the indicators of success of our work. So are we here to address the concerns of governments? Yes, but it's way wider than that. At ICANN, we embrace a multi-stakeholder model. And under that model, we want everyone to participate. Here we have friends from the at-large community that represents end users amongst other constituencies. We try to bring businesses. We try to bring experts and academics into the community process. Specifically for ICANN, we have this thing called the Government Advisory Committee, the GAC. And it's a very unique model because you have government participation in what is very often a technical discussion. And it doesn't say that, oh, you get to override me or I get to override you. Together with the support organizations and the advisory committees, we try to find a solution amongst us, because we understand that the internet flourishes because we started off on a platform with no geographical boundaries or, you know, local law that separates us. And that's why we flourish. That's why we're able to communicate with someone else across different continents. And this is something that we continue to do. So I know we all have 3 minutes here. That's my piece.
I think it's more like 2 minutes. But with that, we actually have a GAC member remotely. Are you there, Andrew? Can you hear me? There he is.
Yes, I am.
So Andrew, you're the GAC representative in ICANN for the Australian government. You also represent the Australian government in a lot of the other internet governance issues. Would you agree with what Yu Chang pointed out there? This is more of an equitable relationship than simply governments demanding answers?
Well, I and the Australian government would agree 100%. I'm not sure that every government feels the same way, and some of it is because there's a certain paradigm of government interactions internationally, which I think a lot of countries have found hard to translate into the internet space. I would have to say from Australia's perspective, the success of internet governance comes back to ability to be a multi-stakeholder model, to bring in not just governments, but private sector, the technical community, civil society, and end users. So I think your statement is good to get discussion, but I would actually say that the main goal of internet cooperation is not to provide answers to concerns raised by government. It doesn't matter who's raising the concerns in some way. The main goal of internet cooperation is to make the internet work, to get a much broader involvement, an involvement of everyone and a benefit to everyone in terms of how the internet works. So I think in terms of concerns that the Australian government might put forward or I might put forward, it's going to be around the transparency of the processes, of decision-making processes, of the accountability of the key organisations that are involved, and the ability for people who are currently outside the rooms to be brought into those processes. So I guess I would like to see those concerns addressed over time, but they're just the sorts of issues that I would raise for any organisation that has such a huge public and worldwide benefit.
Thank you.
I don't think that there should be privileged over as something that everyone would share. But I'll break off it and be running on with it.
Thank you very much. So I have next to me, I have Ashish from Narayan from ITU, and Ashish, your main job is to coordinate projects in Asia Pacific. So could you give us some examples of what both the previous speakers were talking about, that sort of cooperation between different people on specific issues?
Oh, thank you very much for this. In following on, Adil, you made some comments on the WTPF, the World Telecom Policy Forum that the ITU organized. And following on that, the ITU Secretary General launched the Open Talks. And the aim was to see what is the role of government in this multi-stakeholder process, and things that came up like promotion of the internet, how to get broadband to people, cover the areas, universal access, some security concerns, child online protection, and how to get accessibility there. So, I mean, these were some general talks which we have been discussing, but I will come down to specific projects in Asia Pacific region. For example, with the Ministry of Science, ICT and Future Planning, I think I got it correctly, Korea. We are doing a project, we have been doing a project helping countries, all stakeholders involved in assisting them in setting in place broadband policies, wireless broadband mechanisms, sorry. Okay, was it echo? Okay, okay, good. So, and when we do this, we actually carry out national workshops when we are doing that, so that we have a wider engagement, including the ISPs. And to give you some examples, like I have a whole list of countries here, but like Nepal, Samoa, Myanmar, Vietnam, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, and this is an ongoing list. So let me, another example, I'm glad that Mr. Wilson is here, and this is APRICOT conference. We've got cooperation with APRICOT since 2011, I can see some, not only APRICOT colleagues, but I can also see some of the people who attended our trainings here in this meeting. And we have been doing very high quality trainings in which we have involved policymakers, regulators who are looking to implement IPv6 in their countries, either at technology level or strategy level or so on. And going forward, we would like to enhance this cooperation and go on to assisting in actual technical assistance of switching on networks or helping them in the way we want. And in this process, for example, our trainings have been hosted by Ministry of ICT Thailand. I saw one of the representatives here from TOT Academy. And we also have support of the Australian government, so we are glad to do that.
Thank you very much, Ashish. Next year I have Ni Quain on it. Ni, aside from your work as being a sort of a key developer of the internet in Africa, recently you've been the chair of ICANN strategy panel. And part of that report, which I think has just come out, is you identified target audiences that you think people should reach out to in terms of internet cooperation. I think we have a slide with what those audiences were, up on the screen. So, Oni, could you talk a little bit about that work and what the strategy panel has come up with in terms of cooperation?
Yeah, I'm very glad to do that. But let me make the following comment. I keep getting amazed that every time we talk about internet governance, we all immediately rush to the global space. But the real development of the internet is a local matter. It's a matter at a national level, dependent purely on local policy and regulation. So I want to go the opposite direction, that let us move things to the edge and have the development take place at the edge. And that is a very distinct difference, in my opinion. Now, with regard to the, public responsibility framework panel, after taking stock of what ICANN was doing and what the community was requesting, we narrowed down to 4 focus areas, principally looking at education, localization, inclusion, next generation projects, inclusive internet governance ecosystem as the 4 main focal points. But within there, we identified a number of audiences that we thought were important to reach out to. In particular, for the education side, we are really looking to engage with academic and research institutions. We are also looking to engage with next generation developers and policymakers. We are looking to reach out to female entrepreneurs. We're looking to reach out to those in business and also internet-specific policymakers, SMEs, where skills are required, and local organizations that are doing work in capacity building that deserve some support. So these are some examples of the target groups that we are interested in bringing into the new build-out of community in support of the public responsibility of ICANN working better in the public interest, as well as giving back something to the community. So that's roughly where we are.
Can I ask, with respect to that, did you, while doing this work, find any best practices, or is there a particular ways in which identifying audiences, you can get at audiences that you could share with us, or is it at the moment it's at the sort of sketchboard stage?
Oh, I would say it's at a sketchboard stage. Perhaps this is not something that has been done earlier, but fortunately ICANN in its work had been attempting a wide variety of, might say, public responsibility activities. And so after studying that and getting input from the community, we saw some directions, and those were the ones that we began to summarize as an approach. But we are looking to the community to add to it so that we can strengthen it, especially in the build-out, because part of the objective is to use the regional organizations, the regional strategies, as a medium for building out a totally new type of community to come into ICANN and in the internet ecosystem at large.
So while we're talking about regional organizations, we've got the CEO of one regional organization here. I should say, by the way, that the report is up on the ICANN site now. It's out for public comment now. Okay, so read the report and it's open for public comment. Paul, there was the part of the Montevideo Statement, which is a very important statement signed, I think, in October, between the ISTAR organizations, which listed a series of things that you wanted to do going forward with internet governance. There was one paragraph, which I think we have, if you could go to the next slide, which talked about internet cooperation. You can see it on the screen. The need for ongoing efforts to address internet governance challenges agreed to catalyze community-wide efforts towards the evolution of global multi-stakeholder internet cooperation. Lots of buzzwords. What does it really mean?
Well, thanks, Kieran. I'm Paul from APRICOT. It actually is meaningful. Every one of these words was fairly well considered, I think, by everyone involved. And in this case, I think it's the ongoing effort that's being affirmed here. I mean, the statement is an agreement by a bunch of organisations and a commitment to certain positions and actions and directions, and it is ongoing effort that's needed. I think the time factor there is important because the internet has proved its worth, but it has a lot left to prove. It's going to continue to grow very much, and with its growth are going to come more internet governance issues, without any doubt at all. This is a long and ongoing process. So I think in that process, the multi-stakeholder approach has been identified as kind of a unique and critical part of the way the internet has grown. The multi-stakeholder process didn't start when that term was invented. The term actually observes how the internet has always worked. And that multi-stakeholder process has been identified, it's been endorsed, it's been very widely studied and now appreciated. But I think the point here is that as the internet throws...
And I think key amongst the approaches to ensuring cooperation are not only involving people from different areas, different geographic areas, different backgrounds, but also making sure that the target outcome of a discussion is clear, making sure that you actually are talking about the same, you're using the same words in the same way, which is sort of challenge zero, and then making sure that the collaboration in the discussion focuses on getting to some level of agreement and some level of understanding of where to go, instead of just finger pointing and name calling and whatnot. So we've been involved in engaging across the globe, and really across sectors as well, public policy, technology, development, and it's interesting times, and as has already been observed, the internet is only growing. So I think that there's plenty more to do there.
So I have a question for any of the panelists or anyone in the room, which is, have we been getting better at this? Has internet cooperation between what are very, very diverse groups, are we getting better at it? Are governments understanding technical community more? Is civil society understanding the technical community, or academics understanding things? Is it getting better, or do we still have a lot of bridges to cover? Adil.
Yes. Yeah, good question. I will say that with the IGF, thing has improved, and I used to say that in a region like ours, IGF has helped a lot to spread the understanding of the multi-stakeholder approach into solving internet governance issue. We have several regional IGFs, where government people interact with civil society, with technical community on those issues, giving government a different perspective in solving issue. And I think referring back to your first question, is internet governance or cooperation is only addressing government issue? I think this is very important because we are phrasing the issue that way, or giving that perception, because government from developing countries generally becoming more and more vocal and giving the impression that their issues are not being taken into consideration because they are not used to this multi-stakeholder environment where everybody sits around the table and discuss an issue. So what we have to do, or our challenge, is to help those governments understand how the ecosystem works, help them see where they fit in effectively, and thirdly, listen to their issue very specifically. So the multi-stakeholder approach, and in this statement from Montevideo, is not just about saying that we are pursuing a multi-stakeholder approach, but we have to be very proactive. It's not just being passive about it, but engaging actively and continuously, diligently, I would say, with bringing everybody in, listening to everybody, and trying to work together toward a solution. So I would say it is evolving. But we need more effort to make sure that it is a real multi-stakeholder thing.
Can I just add something there, that I think there's a perception that it's others that need to change and not us, but that's really completely wrong, and it's wrong to think that we haven't adapted ourselves to the environment that we're in. I mean, the technical community has always been proud of its openness, but openness is a sort of passive thing, and a multi-stakeholder approach is one where you go out and you bring people in. You don't just open the door, but you let people know that the door is there and that it's open, they can come in and why. And I think the Internet Society, the RIRs, ICANN, have all in recent years actually done a great deal of work to bring people in. It's not just passive openness, it's actually active engagement. So I think there's no sense in which we in the technical community have said everything's all right, we don't need to do anything. We're actually engaging continually and more. I think one of the challenges that we have here is that there's still maybe a tendency to see internet governance as something that happens outside of us. But like multi-stakeholderism, internet governance has been going on since the beginning of the internet. And in fact, we've been a critical part of that. Just because we've sort of used a new term doesn't actually mean that it's a new thing that's happening. And I think we all need to understand that right here and now, it's internet governance. The policy process, the technical training, all of the stuff that's happened this week is actually part of what we're talking about. It's not something else.
Leslie, you have a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that it was only a couple of years ago that the Internet Society actually hosted some folks from governments to come and actually see an Internet Engineering Task Force meeting in action. And, you know, I still have burned in my memory the look of some some faces filled with trepidation as they walked across a hallway floor to see what this crazy madness was going to be about. And what we have gotten out of that, back to my earlier point about coming to share terminology and understand the terms you're using, is we've gotten a bit better of a sense of what are the actual issues that are facing governments with regards to IETF protocols, for instance. And likewise, they have gotten a sense that these people wandering around in jeans and t-shirts aren't necessarily insane. They can in fact be, you know, polite and direct. Maybe not at the same time. But I mean, that clearly doesn't scale. So the next question is, how do you reach out and make sure that you involve more from all walks of life?
So from my perspective, I remember that during the initial WSIS, there was a lot of often angry miscommunication between different groups that you don't see as much anymore. There's disagreement, but there's not as much miscommunication. If Andrew is still there, I'd be interested in your perspective on this, Andrew, as a government rep. Have you seen things change in the past decade or so with how this works and how governments talk to people and how people talk to governments?
Yeah, I'd say, well, first off, I'll ask, am I coming through clearly? I'm worried that I'm sounding like a dog walking in the background and you're nodding, so you can hear me. All right, very good. Yeah, well, it's partly dependent on the forum. So there have been, you know, in our region, APT, APRICOT, there have actually been some really fantastic partnerships between government and private sector and technical bodies improving knowledge and capabilities. In the ITU as well, some of the development activity that's happened has been because there have been actually really frank and useful conversations between governments, groups within countries, and some people with technical expertise. So APRICOT has done great things with IPv6 education in areas, and there's been a strong partnership there, and I hope a mutual respect. In ICANN, which is, I don't know, it's like Hollywood for internet people, and it's how it feels sometimes. You've got all these sort of personalities and soap operas going on. We've had little relationships going to the pit, basically. Governments are a bunch of them, they don't understand how it works, they should be banging off together on the one hand, and you've got all these sort of technical people on the other hand, and they just don't understand that we're responsible to our elected governments and the people of our nations, and we have these vast traditions that we must maintain. So I think there's been a fundamental miscommunication. I think as Kathy mentioned, they're using the same terms but meaning different things. And perhaps not always an understanding that a multi-stakeholder model doesn't mean that government gets whinged about things and everyone else gets to make it better for the government. That everyone has the same legitimacy in terms of participation. Everyone has the right to be heard, and you're actually going to have the dialogue travel from a purely national position, black and white, into something that isn't always predictable or even always controllable. I think over time, and I'll stop soon, but I think we have actually seen the dialogue improve a lot within ICANN. It's become a lot less soap opera-like. Because we've done things like with the new utilities, we've been asked to put out our opinions on some of the new utilities, but we've put out policy rationales behind it. We've actually put out a discussion about whether registries should be open or closed and what the consequences are, and the rest of the community picked it up and run with it and had a very useful policy dialogue. And so I think there has been an improved understanding that the governments, when they're on the top of their game, can insert public policy considerations that don't necessarily go purely to the technical running of the internet, and that's valuable, and that the other multi-stakeholder groups within internet governance are also bringing perspectives that are really important. The governments need to take action and think about it in their own domain, but are part of the big narrative of internet governance, and it's all weaving together. So there's my read. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's my thought.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, so yes, I mean, so while we're all singing Kumbaya on this, and it seems that we've solved the world's problems. So we'll move on to the second issue, where there is a lot of disagreement. This has been an ongoing argument for a long time, and it was behind a lot of the arguments at the World Summit and the Information Society a decade ago, and it's still ongoing now. It's recently been sparked again. And it was raised in the Montevideo statement again, something that has caused a lot of discussion. And also it's been, there's a conference happening in Brazil where this will most likely be a key topic, and that is globalization of the IANA functions, which is the big boogeyman of internet governance, really. So before we dig into that, David Conrad, who at one point was in charge of IANA for his sins, is going to give us a very quick rundown of what it actually is. David.
And they must have been very big sins at that. I guess next slide, perhaps. Yes, so very briefly explaining what it is that the IANA does today. There are primarily 5 functions within the IANA. The first that I've listed here is the Protocol Parameters Registry Maintenance function. That's basically the bookkeeping associated with all the protocols that are used within the internet. There are over 1,000 individual registries. It involves staff going in and checking every internet draft that goes through for our IANA consideration section to update the protocol parameter registries as appropriate. The second function listed there is the one most relevant to APNIC. It's the Internet Numbers Registry Maintenance function. Leo Vagoda over here in the corner is the individual within IANA staff that actually takes care of this, as I understand it. Basically, this function is allocating the top-level blocks of autonomous system numbers, which are used by ISPs, as well as IPv4 and IPv6 addresses, to the regional internet registries, and those regional internet registries then sub-allocate to their membership or to entities who need the addresses. The next two functions are often forgotten. They're actually listed in the IANA functions contract, and they're relatively minor, but they do have significant impact to affected parties. The first of these is the top-level registry for .ARPA. Long ago, .ARPA stood for a project, an administration within the U.S. Department of Defense, but an RFC was issued that redefined the term ARPA to the address and routing parameter area. It's actually used for certain protocols to look up things within the DNS. The list there actually is all the ones that the IANA function provides registry services for. Usually that's done at the request of either the IAB, the Internet Architecture Board, or the IETF. And then the second one, which is even a little odder, is being the top-level registry for the .int, top-level domain. .int is used for international treaty organizations. It currently has 178 zones. It's one of the harder TLDs to get into. You have to be a registered treaty organization within UN databases and have your own international presence and your own secretariat. This one is a bit contentious, particularly within the context of the ITU. ITU issued a recommendation E.910 on the administration of .int, but that's not currently the procedures used for .int. And then the final one, which is the one almost everyone thinks about when they talk about the IANA functions, is the root zone management function. And that's IANA staff, ICANN, is one of three partners known as the root zone partners. It's actually explicitly mentioned with the IANA functions contract, VeriSign and U.S. Department of Commerce, NTIA being the other two. That's the function that accepts changes to the root zone or the root zone registration database. The IANA staff portion of that function is to validate that the requests are syntactically and semantically correct before they're passed on to NTA for authorization, and to be clear, not approval, authorization that ICANN has performed the validation process appropriately and followed the documented processes and policies. And once it's authorized, then it's put to VeriSign for the signing, the actual editing of the zone, the signing of the zone, and then the publication to the root name servers who then make it available to the internet.
Can I just ask on a very high level, how important are the IANA functions to the internet? If you stopped doing them, what would happen?
So the one that would have the immediate, the most immediate operational impact would be the root zone management. If IANA functions were stopped, then it would not be possible to make changes through the normal processes to any of the top-level domains within the internet. So that means that if a name server needed to be changed because it happened to be underwater, for example, that would no longer be possible. And over time, you would see a basic degradation of the services. The other primary functions would have less immediate impact. For example, the Internet Numbers Allocation Service. At this point, the IPv4 pool is exhausted. The ASN number pool there's plenty of ASN numbers and blocks have been allocated to the RIRs for their use. And with IPv6, the initial allocations were so large, it's unlikely that there will be a need for additional allocations, at least in my lifetime.
Thank you. So, of course, what the controversy with IANA is that it is all done under a single contract, and that contract is owned by the U.S. government, and the U.S. government contracts it out to ICANN. That's the fundamental issue.
And one interesting aspect of that is that depending on who you ask, you will get different answers about the validity of that. For example, if you look at RFC 2860, it actually details a relationship between the IETF and associated bodies and ICANN with regards to the management of particular resources, including the protocol parameters, names, and numbers. What is it, RFC 6220? Recently came out that actually documented much more clearly the relationships that the IETF community has with its, I forgot the term, contracted operator, it's not the right term, but the organization that's performing those functions. That is completely separate from the US government's view of the IANA functions contract as an actual contract between ICANN and the US government. Those two different views have actually existed parallel and without any significant contention. I mean, there are little burps here and there, but largely the relationships have worked fine because the primary focus has been in cooperation and coordination to ensure that the internet moves forward and this internet coordination effort does not actually block the actual operation or usefulness of the internet.
Thank you, Dave. So, okay, so that's an excellent rundown, thank you, of what IANA functions actually are, what they actually do. We came up with a debate statement in order to frame this discussion, and it was the IANA contract issued by the US government, I'm sure you have an issue with the word issue there, should be expanded to include other governments. And with respect to that, we actually have a video here from ICANN CEO Fadi Shahadi on that specific point. If you could run the video.
There should no longer be agreements between ICANN and any one government or any one actor, but rather agreements that are supported by the global acceptance and accountability of ICANN to all.
Can I just ask if people hear this clearly? Can we go back and play it louder? I was having trouble hearing that, was it? No, I can't hear it at all. Okay, well, we've got some technical issues. We'll go.
There should no longer be agreements between ICANN and any one government or any one actor, but rather agreements that are supported by the global acceptance and accountability of ICANN to all. ICANN must globalize. Why, you ask? Why it is important. Performing.
a pretty definitive statement, I would say. ICANN CEO saying, yes, this is no longer sustainable, it needs to be globalized, but then of course, adding the caveat that we have to be very careful. If we get this wrong, it's going to cause all sorts of problems. Paul, I'd like to come to you with respect to this. This was included in the Montevideo statement, was that you wanted to move to accelerate globalization, I believe the phrase was, of the IANA contract and of ICANN itself. The APRICOT Executive Committee sort of approved the Montevideo statement, I think just last month, but you also added in extra details, which I think were very interesting, and that was that you felt, could we have the next slide? I felt that I put the bits in it that were additional. No, if you can move forward. That's the Montevideo statement, accelerating the globalization of ICANN and IANA, and if you can move to the next one. This is the statement in support. You pointed out that it needed to account for the broader concerns of the Internet technical community, but also noted that you would seek greater transparency in this arrangement. So the ICANN CEO, it's no surprise that he would want ICANN to be handed the IANA functions. It would make ICANN's life significantly easier, I would suspect. But the response from APRICOT is, we think that this should happen, but we have some issues here that we'd like to see improved before that happens. If you could talk a little bit to that.
Okay. By way of explanation, the globalization, as we referred to it in the Montevideo statement of ICANN and IANA, are two separate things. Globalization of ICANN refers to the fact that there is an AOC, affirmation of commitments with the US government, which it has been, many have called for that to be generalized into an inclusive arrangement with other governments. The globalization of IANA refers to the fact that IANA is operated under a contract with the US government in a particular role. And so the globalization of IANA would be to adapt or to deprecate or to end that and replace it. The NRO, of which APRICOT is a member, has called multiple times for visible progress to be made on both of these fronts, and we've done that quite clearly, and as I say, multiple times. So I think it should come as no surprise at all that we still hold that position. And I think we've already heard from Fadi, in fact, that it is for the optics or the appearances, as more importantly than the functions, that the current arrangements are not sustainable anymore. So the APRICOT EC, if I can speak for the EC, felt that the Montevideo statement needed support. We also wanted to say that, to iterate that we are satisfied, as in fact the NRO has been, that the IANA functions are bundled together and being operated by ICANN. I think transparency may be misread here if it is taken to imply that there's something concealed in a lack of transparency. It's actually not what we meant. It was simply a clarity and a confidence of possibly some documentation that doesn't now exist as to the relationship between ICANN and APRICOT, or ICANN and the regional internet registries in carrying out the IANA functions. I mean, so possibly transparency was not the wrong word if it was taken to imply something, a criticism of current arrangements, but it's actually transparency in the sense of needed clarity of the arrangements which are currently working very well, but which may not be actually clear to everyone.
So could you give us an example? What needs to change? What needs to be improved before you would support globalization of IANA fully?
I don't think that we meant to say that something needed to happen specifically before we would support. We've already given support for it. In fact, I think nothing needs to change at all in order for those current arrangements to be deprecated or to be adapted to become more global or to become globalized. The transparency, as I said, is that if there is something missing, it may be documentation.
Thank you. So, Adil, yes, do you have a point?
Yeah, just want to support what Paul just said. and add that when we talk about globalization of ICANN itself, there is another aspect of it that needs to be looked at, is the legal and juridical framework where ICANN operates from. Right now it is a US organization, and there is some concern as well to make ICANN more global in terms of legal framework, so to be able to address the need of all stakeholders equally. So the Montevideo statement, which APRICOT board support as well, doesn't mean that we are retracting our support to IANA or ICANN in any way, but it's just by saying that we are saying that some of the change on the way has to move faster probably, and we support those change because there are many activity going on right now within ICANN and outside ICANN to improve this overall.
So that links very neatly with you, Pinder. Pinder has been actually looking as a part of another strategy panel at this precise question, effectively. What changes would there need to be, or should there be, in able to assist this globalization? I think we have another slide, if you could go.
Sure. In fact, Eddie and I were on the same strategy panel of ICANN's role in the Internet governance ecosystem. And in fact, we came up with 5 principles and 5 elements of the roadmap. The first, actually, is to globalize ICANN, not internationalize it. And what we mean by that is actually in the report. As it pertains to the IANA functions, I think what David has done is a great service because, clarity is good. And in terms of just clarifying exactly what we mean by the IANA function and from whose perspective really needs to be done. One of our recommendations is really the third one, in fact, is to begin to document or better document the web of relationships. The second one actually talks specifically about the root zone management, which was David's number 5 issue. And then that really is the elephant in the room, which is the root zone management. And what we said specifically is to consolidate and simplify the root zone management. I think you've got the text somewhere. But to do so, the IANA functions contract, we should be addressed holistically. Again, the word transparency, which Paul mentioned, crops up again. Perhaps that can be better interpreted as perhaps being documentation. But given the global role of the internet now in terms of accountability principles, it should be done with not only in a holistic manner, but with a very high degree of public visibility. And so it will be very interesting to see how the other recommendations in our roadmap, there are 5, the AOC in terms of enlarging that, excuse me, better document within the ICANN for the responsibilities that ICANN has. And then for other people, because ICANN is only one small part of the overall internet governance ecosystem, primarily the technical layer, that the others might see to do that themselves. And by documenting this web of relationship, and Adele, please correct me if I'm wrong, there's a greater understanding. Why? Because you've got these web of organizations, and it's very, very confusing for economies that come onto the internet to know where to go, to voice their views, and to have some degree of impact. Again, everything is local, as Nii mentioned, but when you do, you also have to cooperate. You also have to interoperate. The question is, where do you go? And within the internet ecosystem, if we can start documenting that in a better way, then perhaps it will be clearer. Adio, do you want to add anything?
I think that that's clearly explain our thinking behind that. And I think that web of affirmation of commitment, of documenting it clearly, will allow people outside of the system to clearly see where they stand. And that goes back again to your first question. Are we only addressing government need or government expectation? That is the most focal part we are hearing, just because they don't know where they fit in it. Addressing that can help improve that aspect of things.
Could I just add a little plug here for the 70-page report? We have a whole appendix here, Appendix A, on basically the history of ICANN and the Department of Commerce. And what we try to do is, again, eat our own dog food. We're trying to document and make clear to people exactly, not only the history, but the nature of these relationships. So just as was clarified earlier, that as far as the relationship with NTIA, there are in fact two elements to it. There's the contract itself and the AOC. And so, in fact, in our report, Figure 1, which really tries to illustrate that. So there are different ways. Sometimes diagrams help, sometimes text help. What we found, though, is that you know, as Leslie mentioned, there needs to be a great deal of care in terms of how we choose our words. I think one point that Paul mentioned very early on is that, you know, the current term that we use as a working definition is internet governance. And one of the strong things that came out from our report really are two, one of which was, you know, before internet governance, there was good stewardship. Right, even to get to this time, there was good stewardship, and good stewardship never goes out of style. We'll need that going forward. But one of the key conclusions in our report is that the multi-stakeholder report, we looked at different governance models, and that the multi-stakeholder model seems to be the one that, you know, works the best. That should be elaborated and enhanced. And so I think where we are today is like, well, exactly how is that going to happen? And so we view, instead of a hierarchy of organizations, a web of commitments. Not only do you document the ones which exist today, but also to envisage a web of relationships dealing with accountability. Because right now, one of the concerns with why is the U.S. government so-called special, right? There's a multi-stakeholder approach, etc. Well, let us not discount there's a huge historic role that the U.S. government has played to get the internet to where it is today. Let's not be revisionist. They have a huge role. Thank them for that. But as Vali mentioned, you know, is it going to work going forward? And how do we include more parties? Each of them have, again, their own special language and a special way they use certain terms. I think in terms of this new Global Commission on Internet Governance, where you have statesmen and women who look at internet governance in an even larger perspective. It's not just internet governance, it's a global governance. And so they have a certain view, a certain expertise, and it'll be very, very interesting for me serving on this commission is to see, you know, the synergies that they will bring to the mix, because they certainly have a very valid experience and views as we move forward.
If I can just jump on with one comment as well. I want to thank Pinda for explaining the process. So the panels that Pinda and Nii spoke about are 2 of 5 panels that look at a whole variety of issues. And to echo Paul's point that within the community, ISOC and the RIRs and the other players, we're constantly looking for ways to get things better. And so, you know, we talked about the high drama and the Hollywood nature of ICANN meetings sometimes. I'm sure there are people who will miss it. There is also another there's also another panel looking at the policy making process and whether or not there can be improvements made to it. So I think the reason I'm jumping on with that comment is that, you know, people hear a lot about internet governance now, and there seems to be a lot of noise as we move towards the Brazil meeting. The idea here really is for all of us to be in problem-solving mode. It's not about framing the problem statement and reframing the problem statement and saying that there are inaccuracies in the problem statement. The kind of recommendations that have come up really are meant to be conversation starters that, okay, great, we as a community have outgrown the current model and framework, and this is our process as part of the evolution to think about, okay, if we have identified flaws in the system, how do we move beyond that? And I think the IGF example that Adele said was great. I mean, it really talks about a model that has allowed for conversation and understanding, and I think a key, an indicator of its success is when we see the global IGF and the regions wanting to do their IGFs. And right here in Malaysia as well, I'm very heartened to hear that people are trying to get a Malaysia IGF off the ground. And I think that hugs the success and how as a community we're trying to continue to evolve to say that, okay, the current state is not perfect. Let's see what we can do.
Thank you. Can I just jump in there also? Because again, the way we looked at it was in many ways these constellation of organizations and how they evolve. So, you want to jump on?
No,
Sorry.
so I think the job falls to you to break this bubble of happiness.
Thank you. Yes, I am going to break the bubble of happiness. So regarding the globalization of IANA, I think we have to be concrete about what globalization means. Currently, the IANA contract requires that the IANA operator or contractor be incorporated based in the United States of America. and the contract comes from a single government. And now we're talking about globalization, and the question is, should the contract be expanded to include a group of governments? That's one step. What about a group of multi-stakeholder actors? That should be an option too. And then when we're considering options, we should also look at whether or not the IANA functions should be unbundled. Because as I learned from David a few days ago, the bundling of the IANA functions is a function of historical legacy, not in terms of architectural design. So it's possible that when it comes down to a negotiation with the US government, because any successful transition will require their involvement and cooperation, these kinds of things will be discussed, and probably the hardest negotiation will occur over oversight of the root zone management, but less on all the other functions, which could move elsewhere. Thank you.
I'd like to cover two things. One, I'll come to you in a second, David. I think that's a fair point. You don't need IANA, you don't need someone to run both INT and APRA. There's people who run registries all the time. There's no reason for IANA that does root zone management to also run .int. There's no real requirement for that. I recognize that there was this should be addressed holistically, i.e. you should look at how they interact with one another, but that's a fair point. I'd like to go to Andrew if I could, because he is our government rep, and Andrew has faced the realities of what this kind of conversation looks like. You sat through the Wicket meeting, which was a lot of fun. I recall you had a lovely time there, Andrew, and you're going to face governmental realities. What does it look like for you? And also, with respect to the PINDAS group, they're suggesting that there be a common AOC that all governments sign with respect to IANA. Do you think that that would work? Is he there, Andrew? Oh, we've lost Andrew. What a shame. Just at a useful moment. I don't think we have any other government reps in the room, so I won't. And I don't think he's run away. I don't blame him. So, David, with respect to the bundling, unbundling of IANA. Oh, Andrew, there you are.
Yeah. Repeat the question, please.
Sure. My question was, we were having another kumbaya moment here, and it turned out we'd resolved all the IANA issues. The only problem was the world's governments. So from your perspective, what is it? How is this going to play out this year? And also, what do you think about the PINDAS groups?
Yeah, I think I can. I'm not hearing. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. We seem to be chopping in and out a little bit. So give me a wave if you can actually hear me. I'm not seeing anything. All right. Okay, I'm going to sound like a bit of a governmental heretic. I think having all the governments in charge of anything like IANA or the AAC is a pretty horrible idea. And that's partly because of the battle scars of old Wicket. Not all governments are the same. Not all governments agree with each other. It's probably good that they don't all agree with each other. But if you've ever looked at a contractual arrangement where you have a couple of people who are issuing the contract who don't agree with each other and are asking the contracted parties to do something, it becomes a bit of a mess. So on the IANA side, I mean, my question for it is, what's actually broken? What is the evidence says? And then the next question is, what can be improved? And how do we measure that improvement? Because it's very easy to focus on the symbolism of it, and that's very nice, but it's fundamental to things that are important that make the internet work. So I think we should be focusing on functional work, the real world, and there's an opportunity to improvement and at it. The thought that all governments could sign on to the AOC rather than just the US government, again, I have that concern that we should have a sea of slightly differing voices, saying, here's the things the board is giving to ICANN, and they're all a little bit different from each other. So we're either going to be reaching for a lowest common denominator, or when there are things that are critically important, how is it going to cut through that sea of differing government voices? I would far rather have an arrangement that is transparent to the world and accountable to the world, rather than being part of the arrangement itself. So that, I can have the parties who are involved in it, rather than coming to a large echoing room full of hundreds of people milling around, and not being quite sure what to make a change or make an improvement. So, yeah, I think what it's going to come back to is the mechanics of doing it, and I think, and the paper that he's working on are going to be really important. So I think it's thinking through how can this debate so that we'll have a real world effect other than just a symbolic effect? And how can we have assurance that it will work now and will continue to work? We've had something in place that has actually worked really well, that has enabled multi-stakeholder participation, it's enabled the evolution of something that's really. Here's what is there now. Will that evolution continue? And if so, we should be looking at the changes there. But just so that we can all, that my governments and other governments can say, me too, they're part of the big show now. I don't think that's enough. I don't think that the symbolism is enough. Not when the internet is so important, and continuing original function is so important.
Thank you, Andrew. I recall when the US government renewed the IANA contract, it actually did what, if you were to remove the fact it was the United States government and it was controversial, they actually greatly improved the running of IANA. They ran a fairly good process. They asked people what their views were, where it could be improved, and then they wrote those improvements into the renewal of the contract, and there should be a bunch more metrics coming out. Is required that they write what the processes are, etc., etc. But what we are ignoring is that if you have control of IANA, you do potentially have a significant amount of power, which is why the world's governments do not like the fact that a single government is in charge. Is that fair to say? Anyone like to comment on that?
Yes, I think it is a truism to say that a number of governments are unhappy with the current arrangements. I think, my personal belief is that in large part this is driven by a breakdown of trust that had existed in multiple parties prior to various events that have occurred over the past 6 to 9 months. I think one of the key considerations when you're talking about the globalization or internationalization, however you'd like to call it, of IANA, is that it is somewhat interestingly split across a series of stakeholders who have specific interests in specific sections. So, for example, it is likely that if there is some proposal to address globalization of IANA made by a particular set of stakeholders, if that set of stakeholders does not include, for example, the IETF community, it will be unfortunate. Similarly, there are folks who have specific interests in, say, the management of the GTLD root zone management process, who don't really necessarily care all that much about protocol parameters or internet numbers. So I think there are specific sets of interests that will need to be explored more closely. And in particular, when you start looking at the cooperative arrangement of the IANA functions, there are a number of countries who have very specific interests, very specific requirements for the resource that they consider national sovereign, which is CCTLDs, and will react probably negatively to any imposition of rules that are outside their own sets of norms. So all of these will require a very interesting and delicate dance, and I, for one, will enjoy watching it.
Can I just build on Andrew's point? Because I think it's very, very important that one of the principles, getting 5 R's, the 5 principles that we framed in our report. The 5th one is the reality principle, which is you've got all these theories are nice, but you're going to have to continuously check against whether or not it actually is going to be workable in practice. And so one of the things that in our report that you'll see is that we place a great emphasis on form follows function and sort of technical reality. is what you're proposing, actually going to work in practice? And so the devil's always going to be in the details. But let's not get too carried away with the documentation process. That's important. But one of the key elements that came out from our report is to also globalize the accountability within this web of relationships. And so what we also posit, in addition to tailored mutual agreements, is, again, ways of, before you agree, to begin to decide, well, how are you going to resolve the issues on which, if you disagree. And it's probably better to decide that ahead of time before you sort of jump on board and sign things away. So what does that mean actually in practice? Let's start with what we think we know, because again, it's even the language. There's one size will not fit all. We have a common interest to keep the internet whole and to keep it working. And every government has their own view. So it'll be up to them to advocate, well, these are our concerns, and to seek and convince others to share that.
Well, it's definitely going to be, again, a very big topic this year. And of course, what we've not spoken about, because we don't know at the moment, is if the US government doesn't like it, or then nothing will move. It is a contract that it currently has control of. So we will see what happens this year and probably next year, and try and make sense of it. So with that, let's move from this difficult and very precise topic to a sort of more lovey topic of community participation and getting involved in how we make decisions about internet governance, how people move forward and deal with the changing internet. And as a way of starting this discussion, we developed this statement. Internet users will never have the same impact on decision making as the shareholders in the companies that provide internet access and content. And the reason for this statement is there has been a lot of news recently about how large internet corporations are effectively deciding the experience that we have. And I have a slide here of just very recently, if you go to the next slide, of examples of corporate power in the United States. Comcast looking to buy Time Warner Cable, which would give them a virtual monopoly in large areas of the United States. They're being paid by Netflix, which is a content distributor, to reach its customers faster. They are putting a data cap on streaming services run from Microsoft, but not on their own services. AT&T, it blocked two other companies, Apple and Google's. It blocked their apps from running on their phones because they preferred not to have that. It blocked Google's wallet payment system in order to, because it had its own system which it preferred. It introduced this idea of sponsored data services. If you pay them, they will provide the service better to their customers. And in 20 states, ISPs and cable companies have campaigned and won restrictions on municipal Wi-Fi, i.e. Free wireless to people that live in a city. That's just the United States, not just the United States. If you go to the next slide, Germany, Yahoo Germany, its new terms and conditions refer German users to Irish data protection law. So not only do you need to go to another country, you need to learn another language in order to understand what your rights are with a service on the internet. In the UK, Nominet is expanding to second-level domains, and it made a decision after quite a long policy process that it would favor business over charities in the award of .uk addresses. So with that, there is, I'd like to come to you, Renalia. So with that, corporations are deciding a lot of our internet experience. So what's the role of internet users? Can internet users ever have that same level of influence?
Well, I think the examples that you provide in general is an example of companies trying to maximize profits. That's their bottom line. There are scenarios where internet users can have an impact on decision making in companies, and that is when their views and their actions can affect the bottom line or organization sustainability. Another scenario where internet users can affect decision making is when user concerns in terms of harm to consumers result in regulatory authority to step inside on the side of internet users that will enforce organizational compliance. So there is the possibility of that, but in these companies not listening to internet user input or views, they are actually losing out on a lot of values. There are a lot of benefits in inclusion of users. I'll just list a few of them. One is that if decisions impact users, then listening to them mean that you are a responsible decision maker. What does that translate into? That translates into a relationship with your consumer, your customer, and that builds trust. And second is that when you listen to internet users, which are a source of information about impact and potential impact of products, services, or initiatives that you're trying to roll out, you can actually make better informed decisions. So you get higher quality decisions. And finally, internet users are actually a source of ideas and inspiration. When you're trying to deal with complex issues, they are a valuable pool of resources, and they can also be partners in implementation or solving problems. But I actually want to focus on the model of inclusion, and we have lots of organizations, not necessarily companies, that practice multi-stakeholder participation and engagement. And I think that when you want to include stakeholders, you actually have to look at the quality of that inclusion, whether or not it results in meaningful participation. I think Paul mentioned it before, it's not enough for a system to be open. You actually have to make sure that there is proactive engagement, there is capacity building, there are rules and procedures in place that make sure user input is considered properly and given sufficient weight, and that there is demonstrated responsiveness to user needs and concerns. Otherwise, there will not be sustained engagement and they will not be a provider of value for you anymore.
Thank you. A pretty solid case, I'd say. Khalil, I'd like to come to you. You work a lot with civil society groups. What is your view of the benefit of including internet users?
And I'll just like to first add to Renali's point that's really important to engage. I mean, my project, for example, would not have existed a year ago without APRICOT and through the ISIF funds with support. So in this situation, you're often used to seeing, you know, there's EFF in the US, or for example, in India, you have the Center for Internet Society, Internet and Society. But in a lot of countries, we don't have civil societies with this capacity to come here at ICANN and understand the technical implications that are being discussed. Most civil societies are at the level of my internet is down, therefore somebody is messing with my internet. That is their level of knowledge, and that's all they know. And it also comes back, people were talking about, fellow panelists were talking about the working internet. Working internet means different things to different governments. So not being able to access the page because it's considered controversial would be a working internet for some governments, because that means it's working as it should be, where we have control over specific pages. So yeah, so coming on from the civil society aspect, we've been working a long time for, I mean, in terms of ICT4D, in terms of using the internet for empowerment. And when we come towards empowerment, we're talking about, for example, freedom of access to information, freedom of expression, freedom of association. So all this empowerment, you're actually giving to the users beyond the technical level. So the internet provides an avenue for these, you know, users or civil society organizations to empower themselves when there are restrictions locally. So so we need to, one, we need to engage them better, but we also need to build a capacity of civil society organizations that are able to represent them at something like ICANN, or, you know, for, you know, IGIF or related events such as this, because without that, we won't know what their concerns are, and they're not able to bridge their concerns to us. I'll just give a good example of the impact of the internet. For the general elections in Malaysia, the independent monitoring organization of civil society on the results or exit polls were highly reliant on the internet to keep track of, you know, a secondary confirmation of the amount of votes at each polling stations across the country, and they were using it on Google Docs. Now, if the internet was down or these pages were not accessible, we would not have a clear confirmation of whether the elections were really fair or not. And this could have serious repercussions, as you can see in Thailand, if people question these sort of things. So when we're talking about internet governance, we will also have to consider these issues, especially when we have representatives from governments which are not inclusive of their own citizens' thoughts and needs.
Thank you, Karen. So I think there's broad agreement that civil society, internet users, whatever we want to call them, should be involved. The reality on the ground is that not many are, for lots of reasons, which have been dug into many times. So I'm going to come to you, Paul. You're involved in a lot of internet organizations. It won't have passed you by that there aren't that many civil society people involved. What can be done about it?
I think we need to continue our efforts to mobilise community-wide engagement in these issues, and this is one example. I hope that we've got some reasonable amount of remote participation. The session's been fairly well tweeted. I think it's a good example. But I think I've said enough. I'll hand over to
Leslie wanted to make a point.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that a key element here is to make sure that there are no undue roadblocks put up against participation. And when we think about internet governance as making the internet work, I'll observe that 25 years ago this year, one individual did make an impact on the internet that arguably was more forceful than any single organization, even those examples you cited before, and that was when Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. And the very fact that somebody who was not particularly chosen by any group of people could, without requesting permission from anybody, create that system and have it deployed is really the hallmark of what the internet has been. And so I think going forward, it's imperative that as we govern the internet and or continue to make sure it's a success, that we can have real participation by individuals, whether we call them users or whatever else.
So, and I think that leads to you, Hiroshi.
I came from the technical community, basically. So the technical community always want to make it the desire by the users. Though the definition of user is always changing, right? So, for example, back in 30 years ago, the whole of the computer system was, dominated by the ASCII code, English, right? Though people want to connect the computer locally, meaning the language issue going to come out. Then we collaborate to each other, then solve the problem in order that everybody can use the computers. After that, we have the multi-language, improvement into the internet system, such and such. And then at that time, the internet was kind of local communities system. So of course they are communicating to each other. After that, very native, transparent infrastructure gonna come out. After that, the user is actually spreading out all over the globe, all over the earth, right? So nowadays, younger people always talking to over the globe, over the earth. It was not happened in 10 years ago, right? So, and also when you look at the companies, virtual company over the earth, we already observed, which never happened before, right? And also the structure of the company itself going to be changing a lot. Easily change the topology or physical topology because the company itself is kind of in the cyberspace, right? Which means goes to the definition of the user going to be changing a lot based on the transparent infrastructure development itself. And also then, usually the government, local government is conjunction with physical domain, right? So the human being or activity is going to be on the earth beyond the boundary of the physical national boundary. So that is really, really we want to talk with the government. A lot of users are going to work over the earth across the national boundaries, right? So that is how we, strategically inviting new users in the community in order to, maintain the successful growth of the digital economy.
Thank you. So I'd like to sort of lead, if you could move the slides forward, that lead to something that which struck me recently. There was an, yes, this one. There was an accountability review of ICANN, and they had an evaluation of this policy. You see the acronyms there, ATRT2, GNSO, PDP evaluation. Basically what that means is the process by which ICANN's main policy arm made decisions. And they came out with a rather surprising conclusions. And they said a small number of participants who have economic or other support for their ongoing engagement dominated attendance records. In other words, if you are a company representative, then you turn up. And I think they phrased it very carefully, dominated attendance records. But I think you read between the lines and they're saying, they're suggesting there's a level of capture. If it's in your financial interests, then you will put people on the ground. They said there was clear statistical evidence that 3 of ICANN's regions, and you won't be surprised to hear it was neither North America nor Europe, play no meaningful part in the PDP. There were 2 key factors. One is language, and the other was a collaboration and discourse model that had a distinctly Western approach and does not take into account other cultural approaches. And I think, seeing as we're in Asia Pacific, and I know a lot of you go to internet organizations, and there is a very clear culture there that is quite uncomfortable for people from other cultures. So, Maimora, would you like to comment on that and how you engage people and why they're not currently being engaged?
Okay. Oh, Makino Maimura, JPNIC. It's very good point that I'm actually one guy who have been suffering from the language because I need to do my business, for example, in the APRICOT Executive Council and this kind of occasion in English, and it is not really, I every time feel really not sufficient in managing my business. But I'm really, want to encourage many of the people who are participating in APRICOT and APRICOT meeting to say more that what they think, and that's very important. And I'd like to ask that everyone who are very fluent in English to be patient to hear from those who are not really good at English. That's one of the point. And regarding the representation of the Asia from the Asia Pacific, I am now in the part of the executive multi-stakeholder committee of the Net Mundial, which is the Internet Governance Conference in Brazil. And I'm really happy to have quite a big representation from Asia Pacific region. Myself from the technical community, and from academic, the Dongman Lee from Korea is there, and from business, Zahid Jamil from Pakistan is there. And from the civil society, Adam Peak, who is English but based in Tokyo, is there. So we really successfully represent the Asia Pacific region there. That's really good.
Thank you very much. And there's a quick slide there about this meeting that's happening in April in Sao Paulo, and they're taking content on 2 different sections. You can read it while I come over to you, Pinder.
Yeah, I mean, I think we discussed before, before the session. I mean, the Asia Pacific involvement in internet governance and how we can do more. So the very important point of participating, I think, is key. The other thing, the single point I would like to make from the cultural aspect is silence doesn't mean consent. Okay, so just because you don't hear or the level of intensity and engagement and in the rough and tumble, I think is what it's called in some places, it doesn't mean that the people here aren't paying attention, but they may have different ways of expressing it. So please bear that in mind.
Good point. I have David, and then I have Uni, and then you, Adil.
Yeah, I was actually a member of ATRT2, and this discussion that led to that observation was more than simply sort of economic factors that were involved. I mean, there is obviously disadvantage to folks who are not funded by their companies to participate in ICANN and other multi-stakeholder events. But it's also, and it's actually beyond language as well, because clearly if you're fluent in English, you'll have some advantage in dealing with particularly in the ICANN context, in dealing with the discussions that go on in the hallways where most business actually tends to get done. But it was also sort of a cultural observation that the ICANN environment has largely been driven by sort of a Western ideology, Western approach to dealing with conflict and interaction. And for many cultures, particularly outside of the Western sphere, that can tend to be extremely intimidating and off-putting. And we had numerous discussions in the context of ATRT2 how to, what should we recommend on how to address that. And it is an exceptionally difficult problem. And the only thing that I personally could encourage would be for people to, if they're participating in the multi-stakeholder event, to understand that other cultures have other ways of dealing with things, and to take the Postel principle, be liberal in what you accept and conservative with what you supply.
I should say on a personal point, I spent years trying to change the ICANN public forum to a less intimidating approach and failed miserably. The culture reasserted itself, mostly because it's an assertive culture, and American lawyers will not be stopped.
And some and some people actually enjoy the conflict.
Some people enjoy
conflict,
it.
Yes.
Me.
Okay, while I agree with David's viewpoint, I think there's still some challenges on, you must be ready to engage. So if you don't have the capacity, oftentimes you will not engage. If you're not certain of your thoughts at the time, you tend to want to do it offline. And so all those things affect the participation, but the economic one is significant. We did consider some of these challenges in the panel, but we felt that a good way would be to try to migrate some of these activities towards closer to the parties, the stakeholders involved. And that's why regional strategies are very important in terms of narrowing the differences in this area.
Before I go to Adil, if there is anyone in the room that wants to, if there's anyone in the room that wants to ask a question, now's the time to sort of to get up, and we'll come to you in a second. I think there's 3 minutes left. So I see Keith, and then I can't see back there. So Hiroshi, and then we'll take questions from the floor.
Yeah. One of the value of the participation and sharing the experience from the developing country is changing rapidly in this day. I mean, the title of this session is pretty good. Governance to cooperation. So governance is kind of one way, training, giving the information, such and such. So the cooperation is mutual way. The meaning with the mutual way, sharing the information, especially in developing country, is a business opportunity, for example. That is now an economical field, reverse innovation, which means not the developed country providing, good idea, but different way, the developing country providing the very good idea, good opportunity for the developed country as a business opportunity, as well as the, making a good infrastructure. From that point of view, showing or sharing those information, environment is pretty good for the global people. So I love the changing the word for the governance to cooperation, including those, implication things.
Thank you very much. So we'll go to, I can see, well, you can tell us who you are.
I probably can. Is this working? My name's Keith Davidson. I'm International Director for Internet NZ. I'm the Vice Chair of the CCNSO Council and ICANN. I'm on the ISUP board, and I chair the ICANN working group on delegations and re-delegations of CCTLDs. So I have some experience with the IANA contract along the way. But I want to speak today on an individual basis, and so I'll make that very clear. My affiliations don't count. This is just my observations personally. Firstly, I think that this has been very interesting, but it occurs to me there's some confusion even in the panelists' mind. I heard Pindar and I heard David and Paul all say the same thing, that globalisation of ICANN is somehow linked to globalisation of IANA. They are different things, they're different animals, and we've got to be very careful in our choice of words along the way. Might have been a slip, but firstly, ICANN is established to look after the unique identifiers of the internet and manage them in an appropriate manner. IANA is a discrete contract at arm's length from that, and it could be reissued to anybody along the way. So let's not confuse the two, and let's look very, very carefully specifically at the IANA contract. Most of the debate about that IANA contract in terms of the broader desire to remove the US government's unilateral control and substitute it with something else comes because of the CCTLD aspect of that database. There's less evidence that it's so critical to the RIRs, the protocol space and so on. So given that it took 10 years of ICANN history before CCTLDs and GAC members could mention the word redelegation in the same room, and given that it's taken 5 years for that group to come to an understanding of some of the tensions between sovereignty and custodial stewardship of a CCTLD, we do need to tread very, very carefully. So I think I heard those words as well from many people, but I think the rush is rather concerning. I don't believe there's any need to rush. I believe we need to do this properly. The model must be robust, must involve all of the key stakeholders in the IANA contract, and I am very concerned that ICANN is appearing to work top-down rather than bottom-up because it's not listening to its own constituents about this topic right now. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, my name's Jeremy Malcolm. I'm from, I was about to say I'm from Consumers International, but I've just resigned, so actually I'm moving on somewhere else.
Congratulations.
But anyway, so I want to address the third point, which was the third issue about how users can be represented. And so the examples that you gave of companies that are writing their own rules that apply to everyone across the globe was very good. But then Kyril also made the point that, well, governments are doing the same thing and they're not listening to their citizens. So my approach to internet governance has always been to try and equalize the power of civil society as a stakeholder group within the internet governance ecosystem. And obviously that is not going to just happen. And so this study that you referred to where ICANN meetings were looked at to see that only the people who had money were turning up. Obviously, that's always going to be the case when you have an open door model of multi-stakeholderism. And actually, the technical community's model of multi-stakeholderism has been pretty much based on that, on the assumption that if you're interested, you'll participate. But when you move out of the technical sphere, and that does work reasonably well for standard setting and technical issues, but when you get into more contested public policy areas, such as relating to privacy and intellectual property and these sorts of issues, the open door model is never going to work, and you need to have a thicker sort of a process where you institutionalize the equality of the stakeholders in the way that you design the forum. And so that's why I and others in civil society have been working for about 10 years to try to reform the existing internet governance institutions to put that sort of thicker process in place so that we can guarantee that consumers and users will be listened to, even though they're so much weaker economically and politically. So I have lots more that I could say, but I know that we've run out of time. But anyway, I've written a lot on this, so if anyone wants to bug me for a card later, then I'll be happy to follow up with more. Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Jeremy.
Hello, Naranya Nimpuno from NetNode. Some very interesting discussions today, I thought. Of course, the discussions today centered a lot around ICANN and around the IANA functions, and of course, internet governance is a lot broader than that, and I think that's important to keep in mind. Also, it has to do with addressing the digital divide, accessibility in different parts of the world. I've been involved in the internet governance process since the very early beginnings, and I made two observations at the last IGF. I think on one hand, the last IGF was the best IGF I ever attended. I thought the discussions had matured, there was some real insight, and there was not as much of the sort of the political play. There was actually some real understandings of the other stakeholder communities. But at the same time, and so for example, at the last day, there was one of the main sessions addressed surveillance, and there was a representative from the US government answering some really, really tough questions from the audience, and I don't think that would have been possible a few years ago. But at the same time, there were some tough questions to be answered as well. And I kind of see that, I think that we're almost at a crossroads when it comes to internet governance at the moment. I chaired a panel in the Swedish Internet Conference, which I called Internet Governance the end of the beginning, because I think we are entering into a new phase here. And I think the concerns raised today are some of the concerns, but I think there's I think we have a tendency in the technical community to be reactive rather than proactive. I also think that there has been a tendency to ignore some of the concerns raised by countries, but also some of the other stakeholder groups, as not being valid. And I think that unless we find a way to actually address those concerns, this nice multi-stakeholder model that we have is going to break, and these discussions will be taken to forums where we're not allowed into the room. So I guess, but I have a question to the panel, and that is, how do we address this challenge? How do we make sure that we actually take these concerns, see them as valid, and take them into consideration and address them without losing control of this discussion, without removing ourselves from the multi-stakeholder model?
Thank you very much, Ron.
Dmitry Burkov, myself. First of all, excuse me for my poor English. As a Kenori, I have the same cultural problem. But I want to repeat again, as the previous speaker told, because today you spoke mostly and discussed ICANN governance, not internet governance. But if you discuss ICANN governance, I think you missed significant problems which now masqueraded by all these discussions, which last year, Kiran, you remember, it was hugely criticized that key principles of ICANN governance was broken. In UGTLD, a lot of, it was not policy, it was named implementations. Now, no discussions. And I think it's a problem. For our world, it's practically for operators around the world. Nobody care about ICANN. The most of people say never care about ICANN. But ICANN itself, we should recognize now it's a commercial entity which plays a significant role on US market. New GTLDs, new income, are mostly from United States market. And I seriously care if we will expect that I can have a real globalized role in internet management in such case when absolutely there are conflict of interest inside this activity of corporations. And for me, it's policy making, representatives, commercial activity and technical activity in one basket. It's a danger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dmitry. So we've run slightly over. I will do a very, very quick effort to summarize what we talked about. Internet cooperation and development, I would summarize that as we all agreed we had a lot to learn from one another and are getting better at cooperating with one another, and that means governments and businesses and technical community. And there is a lot of work being done on how we can continue to do that in future. People recognize the value in it, and it will probably be the norm in a few years' time. Globalization of IANA, it continues to be an issue, and it's not going to go away anytime soon, but there does seem to be some form of progress, and we'll find out what happens in the next couple of years. And then community participation, I think everyone pretty much agrees that it's good to have as much participation as possible, but there are real problems there, and seemingly a lot of them are cultural, and in the history of the internet has been led more or less by one culture, at least in the internet governance organizations, and that needs to be addressed if we're all going to move forward together. That would be my summary. If anyone has anything that they desperately want to say, now is the time. Adil.
Let me just add something about participation and engagement. I think there is an initiative going on now, which is OneNet, which aim at rallying more people in a more open way, cross constituency and cross organization, to input in this evolution. And I think we all need to engage into this in a different manner, because this goes beyond ICANN and goes beyond Brazil again, and we need to look into that. One other aspect as well is to use a means of participation. We have to diversify that and make them adapted to today's world, where it's not only mailing list or attending to meeting, but exploring the other methods and things.
Thank you very much. A very quick comment.
Just like in terms of community participation, we've always saying we need to engage the community, but we also need to understand that for a lot of cultures and a lot of countries, we're still about 10 to 15 years behind in terms of just people being involved in processes with government, consultation and participation. So there are a lot of other bodies working in this, which are not technical related, like ICANN. And I can say that at least for a lot of countries here in Southeast Asia, we're probably about 5 years behind before we can actually start having meaningful civil society participating in these sort of conferences.
Thank you very much. So with that, I'd like to thank, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank all the panelists, and I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please provide your feedback when you see us in the corridors. Thank you very much.